Right, we'll get started again. Diagnostics. Okay, many problems can be caused by systems and components other than the power steering. What do I mean by that? Any clues? What else could cause a symptom that relates to the power steering but not be part of the power steering?
Electrical. Wheel alignment.
Wheel alignment, yeah. Yeah, good one. Anything else? Someone said electrical? What? Who said electrical?
Me.
What sort of electrical things are we thinking?
Battery.
Battery? Perfect.
VSS.
Sorry?
VSS.
Vehicle speed sensor? Well, yeah, I'll go with that. I'm just thinking, I'm thinking that is still part of the system. It relies on that VSS for information, but it's still something that can cause a problem, don't get me wrong. Yep. But I'm thinking of something outside of the steering system that, you know, there's different sensors that rely for the power steering to work efficiently, and if they play up, yeah, that will cause steering problems, no doubt. But I'm just thinking outside of what would be in the system. There's something I'm thinking of that I thought maybe might have been obvious, but obviously not. Sorry?
Traction. No, the other one. The brakes.
Brakes can cause steering problems. How can
ABS.
Oh, ABS.
Oh, no, not ABS. The brake, if one wheel is jamming.
Yes.
Yeah,
It'll pull, the steering will pull. Brian?
Yes.
What else?
Differential.
Maybe,
Wheel size.
Maybe, yeah.
Wheel size.
We're getting close now. Wheel size, yes, yes.
Different.
Air pressure in the
Air
wheels.
pressure, yes.
Different tire.
Yes, different tyre treads
Sure.
or brands. All those tyres are a big factor to the steering. Okay. All right, let's move on. Okay, so if we're looking at a steering problem, we obviously, as we do with any type of diagnostics, we do a visual, don't we? So I think when we do our visual, we would look at the tyres as part of our visual, just to check the tyres are looking the same. There's nothing looking unusual or sidewalls spreading, anything that could be noticeable. And certainly we want to be checking tyre pressure, construction of the tyre. If we had a radial tyre with a, what they call those run flat type tyres or space saver tyres, that's going to affect the steering. People can be quite untechnically minded, and they might have had a flat tyre and put a space saver wheel on their car and not thought about that being affecting the steering, but it would affect the steering, you know. We want to check the drive belt on the power steering. Power steering fluid, something I forgot to mention. What about fluid?
Yeah,
We
we
need to
low
check
in fluid
that.
or.
And what about the colour of the fluid? We need to make sure it's a nice clean colour, don't we? So those are all things we need to be considering when we do a visual. Okay, all those things. Common symptoms that people complain about. There's probably more than this, but a big problem could be excessive movement in the steering wheel. What could cause that?
Steering box adjustments.
Adjustment? Yep. What else?
Worn out tire rod ends.
Exactly. What about something on the steering column?
Or could be ply on the universal joint.
Yeah, the coupling on the steering shaft. There's a lot of things that we'd have to check, okay, for excessive play. Feedback. What's feedback? Feedback, I'll tell you, is if you're driving on the road and you maybe hit a different type of, maybe it's sort of a dip in the road, and you get sort of a feeling on the steering that's, you know, not consistent, what you would expect to feel. It's getting feedback through the way that the road surface is to the steering wheel. Am I making sense? So what can cause feedback?
Shocks.
Shocks, possibly.
Worn out rod end. The rod end, if it's got to play it, so your car will probably like move.
Possibly, yeah, possibly, yeah. I'm just thinking, you know, even maybe baldy tyres, maybe, because you'd be wondering a bit. What else could cause feedback?
Or sometimes it's like the road surface.
All right. Well, what about if and I'm being hypothetical, of course, but what happens, we're talking about having a VSS sensor to help the steering so it's not so sensitive and not so assistant when we're actually parking the car, but when we're driving the car down the road, there's less need for power assistance, right? But what would happen if the VSS was playing up and the car thought we were still only just idling or just, we're not driving? We could have a lot more power system we should have. And then we would start to feel things more than we should have, possibly, I don't know. I'm just thinking, I could be wrong, but I'm thinking in my mind that could be a problem. What about hard steering? What can cause hard steering?
Loose belt, power steering,
Yeah,
low on fluid.
Low on fluid? Yeah.
Worn out.
And what?
Worn out gears.
Going what?
Worn out gears.
Gears where?
Worn out gears.
We're talking about in the steering box?
Yeah, possible.
I don't think I've seen gears in the steering box wear out. So I think that would be almost unlikely. But there's something else I'm thinking about that could be
Wrong fluid.
Maybe wrong fluid.
If you put a thicker fluid in
Yeah,
you'll feel power steering
Yeah.
more high.
Air in the system.
Air in the system?
Low class horse.
No what?
Low class horses.
Low class horses?
Aftermarket hose.
Hoses? Maybe if they were sucked in or restricted, yeah. I'm also thinking, what about a worn out power steering pump that wasn't
Yes.
producing a lot of pressure? That too, yeah. A lot of things, but yeah, things to look at. Nibble or slight shimmy. I've never used the word nibble, but it's referring to a slight, like that. Not maybe a consistent one, but just a slight feel like that. You mentioned something before, tyre, but you said something else that could be worn.
Rod ends.
Right ends, that
Rod
would
ends,
cause
yeah.
that, wouldn't it? Something worn in the steering.
There's another thing with the power steering box. If you over tight some adjustment, if you do on the power steering box, and when you can, you'll feel a little bit of nibble.
Yeah, I wouldn't. You are right. It becomes tight,
Yeah,
and it doesn't return easily.
yeah.
So there is a drag on the steering, and it's not going to. When you turn the steering wheel to come back to correct it after a turn, it's very easy to come back to where it should be. But if the steering box is too tight or the rack is too tight, it's not going to come back easily, and we'll notice that.
And a very, very common one is if it's low on the fluid, that's going to do the a bit of nibble when you're trying
Well,
to.
I guess I know what you're saying. You'll have a break in the
Yeah, yeah.
assistance, so we'll feel a bit
Yeah.
like a tight spot here and there, and it'll come good. So that's correct. When power steering, when you first drive the car, and you have really good steering, but you have very bad steering when you first start the car, but as it warms up, it starts to steer better, and the assistance seems to be better. Two things that could be.
Oil.
What? Oil?
Fluid is too thick.
Well, it could be that.
Morning.
I wasn't thinking
Once
thinking
it
that.
get heated,
Oil will thin out when it's heated up, so yeah, partly right, yes. No, good answer. What else?
Probably the belt.
All right. Let's assume the oil was low. Okay, when it starts up, it's really noticeable. But as it heats up, what happens to the oil as it heats up?
Expands.
It expands. So we're filling up the reservoir a bit more because it expands. So that's a good indicator of low oil. But it also could be an indicator of bad seals, either in the pump or in the rack and pinion or the steering box, okay? That when it heats up, the seals soften and then they seal a bit better to when they're cold. And everything expands when it heats up, of course. So there's a few things.
I've got a very good one to share about this one.
Yes,
So we were having trouble with the steering. As
yes,
soon as you start the car,
yes,
and for the first 5 till the car warms up,
yes,
you'll have a little bit of slug in the steering. And
Yes.
once it warms up, you drive, and then it becomes normal.
yes.
And then we found out there was a bit of oil leak on the belt.
Oh, okay.
right? So
Yes.
when you park your car,
Yes.
right, the oil sips on the belt, and when you starts to slip, and over
Yes.
the time when it heats up,
Yes.
it burns and it becomes normal.
Okay.
So we had that issue, and like everybody was trying to figure out like what's wrong with it.
See, do you think, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Do you think if we did our visual, we would have seen something on the belt?
Yeah.
You know, we would have seen that it was all soaked.
Yeah.
And when a belt becomes all soaked, it's the rubber gets affected and it stretches and expands and things. So, but yeah, that would be a good example of, you know, doing a proper thorough check at the beginning. But yeah, who found that? You?
Oh no, not me, and some other guy
Someone
was had a
else.
look, and then he came out, and then he figured out like
Yeah,
a bit of oil on it.
yeah. No, that's good. That's a good story. We're talking about a pulling or a drifting, so the steering wants to go one way or the other way. What could cause that? Wheel alignment. Yeah, good. What else could cause that?
Worn out dry rod ends.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. What else?
Two out.
Sorry?
Two
Well, we
out.
talked about wheel alignment, so yeah, we know that.
Uneven pressure.
Yeah,
yeah,
tight, tires,
Different size tire.
different size tires, all that. Yeah.
Brake.
Well, braking will definitely make it pull, but it won't make it drift while we're steering unless we put our foot on the brake.
Or maybe the wheel, one of the cylinder jam, like it's got like full time a bit of braking on one wheel.
Possibly, yeah.
Plus have a bit of drag and your car will try to.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
So,
All right, but things to think about, okay? A shimmy all the time. Particularly, I'm going to give Brian's example. I think it was Brian that said his car at a certain speed shakes. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, that's right.
What would cause it to shake?
wheel balance.
Wheel balance is a good starting point.
And sometimes the tires uneven, like uneven tires as well,
Yes.
because that happened to me once.
Yes.
It was the tire was looking good,
Yes.
but the way it was shaking, it was a bit bumpy. Like if you-
Oh, just because of the shocks, the rear shocks. When your rear shocks worn out, then you have got an uneven worn out on the tires
Yes.
because it keeps on bumping.
Yeah, well, that's not a shimmy in the steering. You'd feel that in the car. But it does affect the tyres if the shocks are weak. If the front shocks are gone, yeah, you get a lot more bouncing and a lot more not so stable on the road. So yeah, that could be, yes.
Dent the rim.
The wheel and no,
But
that's
then
balancing.
if it throws the balance out, definitely, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
because some rims they get a bit bent. So
Yeah.
you drive it, not
Yeah,
shaky.
yeah. But again, it's related to not being balanced because the rim's dented, I would say.
But if the rim is bent,
Yes.
you balance it, the problem won't be fixed
No,
unless you straighten
It depends on the dent, but yeah, you're probably right.
No, because I'm talking with experience, because that's
Yeah.
what has happened.
Right.
So that's what.
Okay,
yeah.
fair call. I can't argue experience. So. Shimon, you put your hand up. Oh, I thought you did.
It
Okay.
already is bent.
All right. We talked before about poor return, so the steering wheel's not coming back, and you said about the adjustment, exactly.
too tight.
Sorry?
If it's too tight.
Yeah. Also, if we had a problem in our piston in the rack where the fluid was leaking internally from the side that's supposed to be exhausting, yeah, so we could have a problem there as well. Sometimes we can have a steering that's really hard to turn one way, but easy the other way. That's a good indication of a rack and pinion steering problem or a steering box problem, okay? But it wouldn't be a pump problem because the pump would be on both sides. Okay. I'm wandering around to see what I can see. What would cause a wandering problem with the car?
Loose.
Rodent.
Nut.
Sorry?
The lock nut on the wheels. Loose.
Damaged
The
rodents.
wheel came loose, yes. That would wonder.
Full alignment again?
Alignment, definitely. Alignment.
Tire thread.
Tire tread, yes. You said something earlier about
The ring air rodent.
the shock absorbers.
Or the shock absorber. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't help if they were really weak.
Tire pressure low on one of the sides.
Possibly, yeah.
Weight of the passenger.
Well, if you built like a tank, you're probably right. Yeah. Okay. So I don't think I need to properly go through all this because we've pretty much covered that. But if you go onto your, what do you call it, the slide on your shared Google Drive and have a look at that. And we'll just do one for example, loose steering. So incorrect wheel bearing. We didn't talk about wheel bearing being loose. Loose ball joints or linkages. Loose steering box mount. Worn or misaligned of steering box. Worn or loose idler. So all those things can cause, slack in the steering wheel. And I think we've pretty much covered everything there, so we'll just keep moving on. Maybe I shouldn't just move on. Nearly forgot. Part of our initial inspection of a steering rod when we're diagnosing steering problems is to road test the car. Make sure the steering wheel's correctly positioned, it's going straight. We want to check it on a full lock both ways to make sure everything's okay. Mechanically check the linkages and suspensions, so it'll be getting under the car and checking those things. The joints and all the steering joints and pivot points. And check the hydraulic, if anything heavy when you're road testing the car. So we want to do that. And before proceeding, we want to check for manufacturer's requirements and specifications. Obtain the correct operating temperatures for checking oils possibly. Test the pump relief valve on both directions. When we're on a full lock, okay, we're at maximum pressure in the power steering pump if it's a hydraulic pump like a conventional pump. And when we're on a full lock, that relief valve would be operating to make sure it releases pressure. If it wasn't, we'd build up too much pressure on a full lock one way or the other. How do we check that? We might have to hook up a pressure gauge to do that, and we can do that, and we will talk about doing that later. And also, make sure the fluid's flowing. Someone said about a power steering hose, maybe if it was kinked or something, it would stop the flow. So we need to check things like that. And if there's no faults, it says check tyres, but I put tyres right up at the beginning. I think tyres should be one of the first things we check. Okay. So power steering fluid can tell us a lot. So we need to check it. Do we check it hot or cold? Okay. When we're cold, normally a dipstick. Some of them have dipsticks. They normally have a cold reading and a hot reading. So just be aware of that to make sure if it's cold, we're looking at the right reading. Most reservoir caps has a dipstick, which I just told you. Some manufacturers recommend specific power steering fluids. In the old days, ATF, which is automatic transmission fluid, was used extensively for power steering fluid. Not so much today, so be careful. Check the colour of the fluid, the smell, that there's no odours, and for signs of any contamination, such as metal or something in the fluid, that would alarm us to something deteriorating in the mechanical side of the pump. Okay, things that we look for. So, picture of you've all seen power steering reservoirs by now, but just who did the power steering flush last week? We all did we?
Yeah.
Apart from Mohammed. It was pretty basic, wasn't it? Nothing complicated, but it was an important service to do on a power steering. Who had never done a power steering flush before? They did one on last week. Anyone? You've done one before?
No.
So hand up if you've never done one before last week.
Before last week.
Oh, okay, I'm surprised for some of you, but that's good. So, you learned something?
Is that the only method that we can flush the power steering fluid?
Good question. Is that the only method? The method we used, for Mohammed's sake, who wasn't there, Mohammed, in the reservoir we have two lines. We have the feed that goes into the pump, the suction line, then we have the return line. We disconnected the return line, we plugged up the hole. In our case, I think we put our finger over the hole because we couldn't find a plug, but we plugged up the hole that was in the reservoir so we could keep the reservoir full. We had a container on the return line to catch the fluid. We sucked out all the fluid that was in the reservoir and put new fluid in. As we ran the car, we kept pumping new fluid in while the old fluid came out
From the return.
from the return until it was nice and red and clean fluid, and then we finished. Okay, and with Alvin's car, he had water in his system, so he had to flush a fair bit. I was surprised how much he had to flush it. But you got nice clean fluid now, Alvin?
Nah, still,
Still milky?
yeah.
You're going to have to do it again then.
He's made.
Maybe
Yeah, Mohammed.
if you can get some more fluid for next week, and Mohammed can do that, okay?
Can I put any transmission oil?
Dextron's 3, it said.
I've got Penrite for my car, which I bought like, even for my Land Rover,
It
I've got
might be
like
okay,
4 liter or 8 liter I've got.
Yeah, it might be okay, yeah. But anyhow, is there other ways of flushing? There are machines that flush out fluid. You've got to hook it up and it has a pump in it and it will flush out. By doing it that way, okay, I feel like the time it takes to set it all up and that, we can do it the way we did it out at the workshop, as long as we keep the fluid full, okay? Another way we could do, some people could just suck out the fluid and just put new fluid in. It's not a true flush because there's still all the fluid in the reservoir. We could also disconnect the pipes in the rack and pinion, okay, undo them, the 2 pipes, and we can manually turn the steering wheel one way and the other way, and it'll push out all the fluid out of the rack, right? Then we can fill up the reservoir, and you know, it's a lot of mucking around, but yeah, that's another way we could flush it. And we run the risk of getting air in the system, whereas if we do the way we showed you in the workshop, less likely to get air in the system unless we ran the, while the car was running, we ran the reservoir dry, which we never want to do and never did do. So there are other ways, but I think the way I showed you is the most efficient way, personally, okay?
Because if you work in the auto shop,
Yes.
you're gonna work by yourself, and how are you going to flush it if you need somebody to hold you?
I don't know, you'll always need someone. Some of the things when you do, you need to be good.
Most mechanical shops, there's times when you need a second pair of hands. If you are by yourself, I guess what you could do is have it all set up, turn the car on for a few seconds, turn it off, run back and put more fluid in and start it again. There's always ways we can improvise and do things, yeah, it's really better to have 2 people. It's easier. Okay. All right, I've mentioned about checking pressures in your power steering system, okay? It's important to do a test. And when we're doing the test, we do also have to turn the steering wheel on the full lock, but never to hold it on for more than a few seconds. Otherwise, we run the risk of building up too much pressure and we don't want to blow up a hose or something. But when we do our test, I'm going to show you a video in a minute how to do it, but just before that video, on this side here, here's a typical setup. We've got our power steering, and we have our high pressure hose, and we're going to put a gauge in the middle of the hose. Notice there's it says close, there's a valve there. So in the video, it's probably going to explain it better than I can, but what we're trying to do is, we're going to close the fluid from escaping from the power steering pump so that we can get full pressure of that power steering pump. We're not going to do it for very long. We want to know the full pressure of that power steering pump under full pressure. So that's how we're going to do it. Then we're going to open it up. We're then going to turn the power steering to full lock. And when we go to the full lock, we're going to hopefully see almost the same pressure that we saw at there. We're going to hope to see the same when we're on a full lock, because that's when we get nearly full pressure at the power steering. If we don't see full pressure, okay, if we don't see full pressure on one of the locks or both of the locks, we can guarantee we've got a problem in the rack or the steering box. If we lock that up and we've got lower than normal pressure, where will our problem be?
Pump.
The pump. So is that easy?
Yeah.
As long as we've got a gauge that will go to the right pressure. I have one of those in my workshop, so we'll have a look at this video.
Hey guys, today we're going to cover how to use a power steering pressure gauge to pinpoint problems with your power steering system. Let's go. Using a gauge like this can help eliminate the guesswork when diagnosing a power steering system. So, I'm going to show you the right way to use one to determine whether you've got a steering unit failure or a pump issue. First, you'll want to install your gauge per the manufacturer's instructions and make sure the deadhead valve is in its full open position and the reservoir is filled to the cold line. Start the engine, turn the steering wheel lock to lock 10 to 15 times until all air is removed from the system, Once done, recheck your fluid level again. The first test is to perform a deadhead pressure test. This is the maximum pressure the pump is capable of producing. With the engine at 1500 RPM, close the deadhead valve and record the maximum pressure. Don't keep the valve closed for more than 5 seconds or you'll burn up the pump. If the pressure readings are within the manufacturer's specifications, the pump is doing its job, so we'll move on to the steering gear. If the numbers are lower than the manufacturer's specification, there is a problem with the pump or maybe even a belt tension issue. Now that we know the pump is doing its job, let's see what the steering unit is doing. With the engine at 1500 RPM, turn the steering wheel full left to its lock position. Again, do not hold more than 5 seconds or you'll burn up the pump. Record the reading, then do the same to the right side. These numbers should match the numbers of your deadhead test. For example, if your deadhead test showed 1400 pounds and your steering unit test showed 900 pounds, there's a bypass in the steering unit. Some customers complain of the lack of assist in one direction only. This is never going to be the pump. The pump doesn't know left from right. More than likely, we're going to find a problem in the steering unit. Do the same lock-to-lock test that you've just performed by turning the steering wheel. You're probably going to find out that you've got much more pressure in one direction than the other. You've just found the problem. There's bypass in one direction and the steering unit needs to be replaced. That's all for now. Remember to grab that gauge the next time you do a steering repair. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you on our next edition of ProTech.
All right, has anyone done a power steering pressure test before? Did anyone know that that's how you would go about testing the pressure? No. So yeah, but no, it does save guessing. We don't want to guess the part, so unless we're sure that we're changing a part, we need to do a power steering pressure test. But not everyone's got that equipment, have they? Have you got it, Mohammed, in your shop? No. I didn't think so. Moving on to electric steering. We probably don't need to use a pressure gauge so much in electric steering. And also the hydraulic electric steering often will have a PED to tell us the pressure in the steering itself, so that helps a lot. But you know, we have to work with what's this? Scan tool. A scan tool, isn't it? Okay. Okay, so we can look at the engine speed. What's that engine speed? Is that what would you say the car's doing? It's the car driving down the highway?
No.
Idle.
It's idle, isn't it? So we know it's idling. Is the steering wheel straight ahead?
No.
No.
No? Is the engine hot or cold?
Hot.
Is it cold? Is it hot?
It's cold.
Hot. It's what?
Was that degrees
Cold.
Celsius?
Everyone's got different ideas.
No, engine is cold.
Hands up hot. Hands up cold.
Normal.
So, some of you aren't sure, but some of you are.
No, because it's 90 degrees something is the operating.
But don't forget, we're looking at the steering temperature.
Degrees Celsius?
Oh, the steering
temperature. I'd say the car's at normal temperature. You said that, didn't you? Because it's not at room temperature. If it was cold, it'd be at room temperature. Don't think 59 degrees is room temperature. So yeah. But what I'm trying to allude to is that you see a lot of information that you can take in about the condition when that was taken, okay? And it's important to be looking at those things. You listening, Brian?
Yeah.
It looks like you're playing. He's looking at the dating side, I think. Is that right, Brian? Any nice girls, Brian?
Right.
So when we're looking at this now, when we're working on the electric power steering, we're going to be looking at things on our scan tool and things using our voltmeter. We're going to be looking at resistance voltage or voltage drop, any open circuits or any short circuits, you know, all these number of things that we're going to have to be looking at now that we wouldn't have had to look at when we didn't have electric steering, but things that become second nature as we learn electronics, okay? We have to analyse component wear, so make sure that we don't have any damaged steering components, of course. So that's important. Just because there's electric steering doesn't rule out mechanical problems. So we have to differentiate whether do we have an electric problem, do we have a hydraulic problem, if it's an electric motor driving hydraulic, or do we have a mechanical problem, okay? If it's a fully electric steering, we don't have to worry about hydraulics at all. All right, I'm going to let you listen to a small segment of a very big video, okay? But this guy is Dave Hobbs from America. He does a whole series on different subjects that are tested in America. Have you ever seen me wearing my tat shirt, my yellow? Have you ever seen a badge on my sleeve saying ASE accredited?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is preparing the technicians in America to sit for an ASE test, okay? Which is a proof that you're at a standard as a technician, that you're at a level to be able to wear that badge, okay? And they do it in certain subjects, so it's not overall, and this one will be steering, so it's just a segment on their steering section, okay?
You may see a question on your A4 that's on a very new system called electric power steering. Now don't confuse that with variable assist power steering, which has electric solenoids or coils or something to that effect to help you get the best of both worlds, a stiffer steering at high speeds and a much easier to turn steering wheel at low speeds like in parking maneuvers. This is totally electric. In other words, there is no hydraulics whatsoever. Now there is a variation between the two. There's electro-hydraulic power steering. Honda dealt with that for a few years with some of their smaller cars, I believe the Civic, where you had an electric pump that was controlled by a module, and that electric pump pumped up the power steering pressure much like a mechanical pump, belt-driven pump would. But this system on the Chevy Cruze, and dates back into some of the vehicles like Chevy Malibus back to as early as 2005, has totally electric power steering. And here's how the question might read on your test. A vehicle with electric power steering has just had a replacement rack installed. Technician A says that an alignment should be performed to ensure proper tow. Technician B says the steering angle sensor should be reset or relearned. Who is correct? Well, before we go any further trying to answer this question, let's dissect it a little bit and use good old common sense. It's going to help you out so much on ASE test. Whether it's a 70-something car or a 2011 Chevy Cruze like we're working on right here, don't matter if it's got a mechanical, manual rack, power steering rack, variable assisted, or total electric power steering type of a steering rack. If you replace the steering rack, the rack and pinion, you're disconnecting the tie rods from the steering knuckles. And you have to do an alignment for tow when you put the vehicle back together. So Technician A is right off the bat. We don't have to know anything all about electric power steering. Technician B, however, is adding something to the fracas. So we could have an A only or answer C. So we've already divided this question into a 50-50 chance. But let's talk about Technician B. He's referring to something called a steering angle sensor. A little device like this that goes typically in the steering column, so the steering shaft and the column goes through it like that. And as you turn the steering wheel, this sensor, either optical or in some cases a couple of potentiometers and a little switch that opens and closes, tells a module not only where the steering wheel is pointed, but also how fast it's being turned, and in some cases the torque you're putting on the steering wheel as you turn the wheel. That's very important to know. The module wants to know, am I just doing nice little lazy maneuvers, just little corrections, I'm driving down the highway, or am I doing one of these numbers in the parking lot as I'm trying to park the car? Obviously the latter, I want more pressure, or I want more electric help if it's electric power steering. And if I'm just doing these numbers, then I want a stiffer steering. I want a less electric help or less hydraulic fluid if it's hydraulic variable assist power steering. So these have been around a while, and they're also used on cars with stability control. If the car starts to slide sideways and you're seeing a yaw sensor start to see the car spin around, or a lateral accelerometer checking sideways movement of the car, that combined with what you're doing with the steering wheel, am I making small inputs or am I doing it on purpose, that also helps an ABS/stability control module know what in the world is going on with the steering angle request. So this sensor serves several duties. Now, when you want to put in a new part, whether it be a module for the electric power steering, the electric power steering motor, the rack and pinion, this is going to have to be relearned. Let's look a little bit in how power steering on the electric version work, and we'll come back and answer this question for certain now. this next illustration, you see the three kinds of electric power steering systems. Now, a couple of them I'm familiar with, being an old GM guy, Chevy Malibu, the very first one on your left, that's one that's got the little electric motor that helps assist the turning of the steering shaft in the steering column. So it's inside the car, and this is a very similar setup right here off of a little import car, so it's not very large, doesn't have to do a lot of work, but it's electric power steering. And then we have same thing, but move the electric motor to the middle, called a pinion assist, right down there at the bottom of the intermediate shaft, right on the pinion gear. And then finally, like this Chevy Cruze has, we have an electric motor, we'll show you here in shortly, electric motor, huge electric motor, 12 volts, on the actual rack. Now it's interesting that on the hybrid Tahoes and Escalades, what GM calls their two-mode hybrids that they've had for about the last 3 model years, those use a 42 volt power steering system because you have high voltage of 300 or more volts in the hybrid system. They say, hey, we'll just drop it down to 14 to charge the battery through our converter, DC to DC converter, and we'll drop it also down to 42 so we can have a little extra edge of steering that vehicle with a little bit more muscle electrically. So whether you've got electric power steering in any of these places or not, you put on a steering rack. That's Mr. Obvious. That's a basic mechanical common sense question. We know technician A is right. Technician B says, do I need to do a reset or relearn on the steering angle sensor? And no matter what, if you're replacing that sensor, sometimes disconnecting a battery on some cars, like Chrysler for example, you may have to cycle the key and do some kind of a feature. It's pretty simple to relearn that sensor, that steering angle sensor, or you may have to use this factory scan tool. So they kind of vary all over the place. Make sure you know there are variations. ASE A4 won't ask you which particular model does what, but it may ask you some of those variations. So the answer is both technicians are right. You got to do a tow with an alignment job with a rack replacement, and probably should relearn this when you deal with any kind of a steering component on the vehicle. While we got this vehicle here in the shop, let's go ahead and get it hooked up to our GM MDI, the Tech 2 replacement for vehicles of this nature called the Global A architecture that have 3 speeds of CAN data. No longer will work with the Tech 2. They work with its successor, the little MDI PC computer. Now we're going to take a look at that and look at some PIDs and see what we can do with electric power steering in the bay. So we get a little bonus here, learn more about how to pass your ASE A4, and also work on a new system you may see in your shop before you know it. Okay, I've got the MDI hooked up, and if we can get the key on, don't start it yet, we're just going to do a key on. There's a list of modules, and they are many, let me tell you. We start with engine control module at the top and go down through fuel pump control module. And let's see if I can get this scroll to work there. All through the radio itself, passenger airbag module, telematics, remote heater, air conditioner module, airbag module, you name it. This car has got modules on that CAN bus, and we're going to take a look at the power steering module. So it's already highlighted. I'm going to go ahead and say enter, and we got a key on, engine stopped. We'll check codes first off. They have the ability to do self-diagnostics with electric power steering. That would be a must. You can imagine if you have regular hydraulic steering, and we talked about this in the program, if you don't get that spool valve, that centering valve in the rack or in the steering gearbox just right, you can start the engine, and as that pumps up power steering, it can move the steering wheel all by itself. Well, imagine what we can do with electronics if something goes wrong. So we definitely want to make sure we're monitoring the system, you're checking codes when you have it in your shop, and you're doing things like resetting the steering angle sensor and doing the right procedures, because you could put somebody in a harm if you don't get that electric steering right for that vehicle. We're going to go ahead and hit enter and see if there's any codes. And we have no codes, so that's good news. And it keeps updating this particular scanner to tell us if we're having codes as we progress. So I'm going to go ahead and go back up. So we have code monitoring capabilities with this particular module and this scanner. Let's go ahead and go into data display and look at PIDs. And we have a handful of PIDs here. We've got battery voltage, vehicle speed, The higher the vehicle speed, the less help from that electric power steering that I need. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at that power steering unit now. I'm going to put my bright light in here and also a laser. So behind that little pressure device for our fuel system, way down there where the flashlight is going back and forth, you see a black, like a black cap, then you see a large stamped aluminum casing. That is the electric power steering system. That is part of the rack and pinion. So right there where the laser is, that's the EPS on this particular Chevy Cruze. Now what we're going to do is, just for grins, let's see if this thing works with the key on, engine stop. Go ahead and turn the wheel and see if we see a PID change, and tell me, go ahead and shout out here to me in the front of the car, does it feel easy to turn or is it hard to turn? It is hard to turn, so we're waiting till an engine run signal for it to work. But because it is electric, we wouldn't necessarily have to do that. We don't have to have the engine running. Just like a hybrid has a DC to DC converter, you don't have to have the engine running to get that 14.5 volts of charging voltage out of it, as long as the electric stuff is powered up. Let's go ahead and look at that steering angle sensor. I'm going to see if I can highlight that. Steering wheel angle, 158 degrees, and then we've got newton meters of torque. Let's go ahead and put it back on degrees. Turn the wheel again. We see it changing. We see that torque input right below it change as well. Let's go ahead and start it up now. Now see if the wheel is easy to turn, just like in butter. Nice and easy to turn. Not much steering input torque-wise. That's because we've got the assistance of the electric power steering doing the job for us. Now if we go down here and look at some other things, if you wondered, did I successfully program or calibrate my steering angle sensor? Now it's saying power steering control module center procedure. So just like centering the position mechanically on hydraulic power steering, you need to do that with electric power steering, and that PID tells us we've done that. And we go ahead and scroll down a bit. There's also calibration complete, learn status for the soft stops. So that's turning the wheel back and forth. And then talking about the worm gear and the worm gear counter, all kinds of PIDs. We get into deeper and deeper. Almost seems like we need an electric power steering class at this point, don't we? All right, let's see what we can do with the scanner regarding special functions, learns, and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and back out. It's just plain interesting, isn't it? There we go. We go up to reset configuration, reset functions, learning things, and we'll see what we can find. The steering angle sensor relearn actually might be in the stability control, which should probably be in the ABS. So what we can do here, we can do power steering stop soft resets. We can do power steering soft stops learn, a couple of features in the power steering module itself. So probably the steering angle sensor, since it has double duty, it works with stability controls, which is part of ABS. On this vehicle, we would find the relearn procedure in that module. Obviously consult the service manual. It may be simpler than using a scan tool. Sometimes it's a simple matter of disconnecting the battery and cycling the key and things like that. So anyways, here's just a little teaser for you for maybe a video coming down the road on electric power steering as they get more and more mature and they show up in your shop. But one thing for sure, a couple of questions might just show up on your A4 test.
Okay, that was a lot in that video. Hoping everyone got something out of it. A few things that I wanted to point out. The importance of a sensor for the steering. And probably to broaden your mind more of that sensor. It's not just checking the angle of where the steering is, but it does do that, of course. But it's also how much force, how much torque are we putting on that steering wheel as well, it registers. And it's not just for the steering. Did you pick up on that? It's not just a sensor for the steering. Did you get that? What else is it for?
ABS.
ABS. What else is it for?
Engine speed.
No.
The vehicle stability.
Stability control, yeah. So, you know, this is what's happening with cars with sensors. They've been used for multiple reasons. and have multiple purposes. Did you notice that he was trying to show you how to recalibrate the sensor, the steering angle sensor? And while he was in the steering, he couldn't find the calibration to do that? Did you pick up on that?
Just a manual calibration.
Well, it could be, but he was saying it could be in the ABS module, and he was in the steering module. So that is quite the case. A lot of times when we do the
From the steering model, you have to go to the ABS module.
ABS module, because it's part of
correct the steering.
because it's part of the vehicle stability control, which is part of the ABS. So.
Okay, just a quick question. Like
Yes.
before they had like ABS model and stability model and then
Yes.
the steering model, right?
Yes.
So now they all put one, all in one, or is it like separate,
Well,
still
hang on,
separate,
hang
but they
on,
liaise?
hang on, hang on. Can you rephrase what you just said? You said once they had a stability control, ABS,
Now
steering.
the ABS and the steering, right?
Yes.
There were two different models before,
There's still two different modules.
but they
okay?
liaise with each other.
They talk to each other
Oh.
through the network. But I thought you might have said vehicle stability and ABS.
No, the same.
Yeah, they are all together, the ABS and stability control. But again, it's still all tied in with the steering now too. When you've got electronic steering, the stability control is going to help control the steering as well, to keep the car under control, okay?
My question was, I just didn't get that one when he was showing on the Chevy that steering control module, right?
Yes.
So nowadays, do they have all in one, or do they have a separate?
No, as far as I know, the steering
Separate.
modules are separate.
Oh.
Generally speaking, anyhow. Things can change, but I'm pretty sure you'll find. All right, let's look at the power control module in a car. Let's look at the transmission control module. Are they separate or
Yep.
together?
Separate.
They're together mostly, but they can be separate. But most times when you say power control module, it will include the transmission control module. If we call it engine control module, there's a good chance that the transmission control module could be separate. But yeah, they can combine modules, but they're two modules in one in some cases, but they'll come up on your scan tool as separate modules. Okay? There's something else I picked up on that too. Did you notice that he talked about the TAC2 scan tool?
Yeah.
And then he said the MDI. The TAC2 is GM's original factory scan tool. The MD1, and then there's an MD2 that comes again later. Upgrades where they've got more modern scan tools for the factory, right? And he was saying that this vehicle, you can't use the TAC2 to do what he wants to show us. You have to use the MD1, MDI1 I think it's called. So isn't that interesting, that our scan tools get outdated very, very quickly, okay? And that's happening all the time. How often do we upgrade our scan tools in our workshop? Probably every 5 years at least, but maybe even sooner.
Once you break,
Not break.
once
just
you break, then you get the other one.
many of our aftermarket scan tools become obsolete very quickly, and they can't be updated in software because there's newer types of scan tools, because technology keeps advancing and we need to keep up with it. So I think
They're
that's
not cheap.
No, they're not cheap, but they're not as dear as they used to be. My Auto Logic was just short of 20 grand. That was for doing about 6 or 7 or 8 maybe European cars. Couldn't do all the European cars. I had Snapple, and I think it was close to 10 grand, maybe 8 grand, I can't remember. My G-Scan was close to 8 grand. I mean, the list goes on. I had quite a number of scan tools. I needed them because there's so many capabilities that one scan tool is more better at doing than another scan tool. One scan tool will cater for better models of cars than another. Who knows what the best scan tool is? Pico's not a scan tool, by the way.
Good morning.
Who would like to tell me what the best scan tool is?
I use Trandon.
Launch.
Trandon.
All right, I'll tell you what the best scan tool is. Okay, the best scan tool is the OEM scan tool, the factory scan tool. Okay, it will do everything you need it to do and everything that the manufacturer wants you to do. An aftermarket scan tool will have limitations. They always have limitations.
Just That's one question. Like for example, if I am buying OME Toyota scan tool, right?
Yes.
Does it gonna cover all the Toyota vehicle, or it just
Up
gonna...
to the, when you buy that car,
Yeah.
but when technology improves down the track, it might become obsolete because they'll have an advancement.
Or can you
for that.
upgrade, or just you need to just buy another?
You can get upgrade software, but it may come to a point where you need to upgrade the
Okay.
hardware as well. So everything has its life expectancy, its life limitations. But we in the aftermarket deal with such a broad range of vehicles. I think here in Australia at one time, it's probably more now, but at one time there were 64 different manufacturers of cars that we had in our country, and we import all our cars now. The same time in America, there might have been 32 different makes. So we had double what they had to actually have to cater for. Are we going to be buying 64 factory scan tools in a workshop if we're
Nope.
going to make profit and be
No.
economical? So what we have to do is we have to buy the aftermarket scan tool. It's becoming more and more noticeable that people are specialising in certain makes and models more than they used to. Maybe not in all shops, but I tend to get the feeling, and I could be wrong here, I stand to be proven wrong, but I get the feeling that those that specialise in Mazda, or they specialise in European cars, or specialise in Asian cars, whatever it be, okay, they tend to do pretty good because they start to get good at that one make of car. They can afford to buy a factory scan tool. They can afford to get more training in that range of cars. They don't have to have such a broad knowledge, you know. And people start to realise, okay, the dealership, people that go to dealerships go there, why? Because they perceive that that dealership knows more about their car than a normal mechanic, in some cases. We know that that's not true. They get some training, yes, but they're not always experienced like we are in the aftermarket. But the public don't see that sometimes, particularly on a new car. But those that are specialising in a certain range of cars can come across with almost the perception by the public nearly as good as a dealership, but a lot cheaper. They may not be cheaper, by the way. They probably are. But what I'm trying to say is, I think in the future we're going to see a trend where more and more aftermarket people are going to get into specialising. Okay, we'll see where I stand on that in the future, but I think that, and the reason I think that is too, because I think that's the only way, the aftermarket can properly survive. Because there's so many different makes and models there's so much that we have to know now. How can we cater for the broad range and do a proper job on every car? Are we going to get caught sometimes?
Yeah.
And do we get caught sometimes? I think the problem with the aftermarket is we're stuck in our old thinking. We're not seeing the future properly. And this is why so many are still doing all makes and models, including myself to a degree. So I was all makes and models right up until I sold my business. But I also sense what I'm talking about as a probable way of the future for aftermarket to survive. The other thing the aftermarket need to do in a big way, and they're starting to do it, is to network and have other workshops that are like-minded, that can work together, that specialise in different vehicles, so they can share their customers around. So, you know, whether you don't want to lose your customers and you just contract it to the other workshop, but have someone who specialises to do that make and model. So I'm just talking about ideas that were in my head. I always vision, and I've always been a dreamer of how to run businesses. I'm not always the best, but certainly I think ahead, you know, and that's where I think the industry should be going and could be going. So that's just to throw that out there. It's nothing to do with what we're doing today. But why I brought that up was we're talking about scan tools and the need to have factory scan tools, but the practical thing is we who do all makes and models can normally not afford to just buy a factory scan tool, so we do buy the aftermarket. In that case, a range of aftermarket scan tools tends to be the answer to probably cater the best for the maker cars. Okay? All right. I want to move on now to some real live problems, okay? I've got two of them at the moment. So I'll just, hopefully the internet's going to work for me. So, we've got here a Ford Focus, okay? The customer's complaint Actually, this is the second one. I don't know what happened to the first one I had, but yeah, this complaint is about, okay, when he drives, the fuel gauge is erratic sometimes. Okay, also, sometimes the ABS and the VSC warning light comes on. What's VSC?
Vehicle stability control.
Yeah, okay, so the stability control light and the ABS light are coming on at times, and it's only intermittent, but also the radiator, not radiator, where'd that come from? The radio is flashing, right? Oh yeah, the steering assistant light came on, and we look down a bit more. Where's my mouse? Okay, so on the initial, I come back to this. The steering assistant warning had come on once previously, once only. Do we take notice of that, even though it's only come on once?
Yes.
We do, don't we?
Yes.
All those little things we take notice of. Sometimes the customer won't tell us everything, so we have to draw it out of them. They might have seen it come on once, but because it hasn't come on for a long time, they've only seen those other problems. But fortunately, this customer was able to feed that information to the mechanic or the service advisor, which recorded that as a problem. Okay, on their initial road test, there was no problems. Everything drove okay. Okay, so on one occasion, turning the steering wheel down on the right-hand side coincided with the ABS and the traction control light coming on one occasion. So this is in the workshop. So a full scan was done. So they do it not just to scan the steering or whatever, but they scan the whole vehicle and see what comes up. It was also interesting to note that the power steering module says the fault codes were present across the power steering module, the ABS module, the instrument cluster. So there's more than one thing we're dealing with, it would seem. Who would agree that there's more than one thing wrong with this car at the moment? Anyone? No comment? We'll see what codes came up. So, these are the codes. What's the B code stand for?
Body control.
Body control. What's the ABS?
Body.
It's a body control. The battery voltage was too high. What's the U code stand for?
Under. Chassis is C. B is body. B is power.
I told you last week you were here. No one can remember? Brian knows. What's U stand for, Brian? What does U stand for? All right, we'll go through them. Okay. P is for
Powertrain.
power control. B is for
Body.
C is for chassis. U is for sorry.
Universal.
What was that?
Universal.
Universal. No, that's a good try though. No. It's for network problems.
Oh,
Okay?
Network.
Stands for Utah. Utah was a very early protocol used when networks of computers in cars or modules in cars were first invented, I guess. And just like our home computer, computers are networked together. But U is for a network problem, okay? Communication or a communication problem, okay? Who's not going to forget that next time I ask? You are. No, you're not. Okay? U is for?
Utah. Network.
Network. Yeah, communication. Because all the other codes coincide with the first word, like, it makes it easier. But if we think, we know that there's four things, okay? Engine, power control, all the body, all the chassis, then we're left with the network or communication, okay? So we've got a communication problem in the ABS. We've also got a communication problem in the cluster. The power steering, we've got low voltage, but also a communication problem. And also another U code for the program terminal. So what's that telling us? The likelihood of our problem to be? Have we got a network problem?
Yes.
Yeah.
And would that cause a whole lot of problems possibly in these areas?
Yeah. The battery is.
So do we think we got more than one problem?
Yeah.
Wrong answer.
It could be just a communication problem. with
Yes,
each other.
we
So it's
probably
a single
have
problem.
one problem is that communicates with everything else in the network
Yeah.
that's causing everything else to go wrong. Okay, good answer. The guy that was working this car, don't forget, he noted when he pulled his steering wheel down that the light came on that once too. So keep that in our mind as we work down. So he looked at live data.
Oscar.
Live data. Do we know what live data is?
Yes.
Yes.
What's live data, someone?
When the vehicle is running and you put the scan mode.
And what are we looking at?
What
The
is
actual
happening?
performance of each individual one.
Yeah, we're looking at what's called the PIDs. The PIDs are the values of all those things that the computer has processed. Okay, it's processed all that information that comes into it, and when it processes it, it puts a value on it. Okay, so when we look at a scan tool, we realise that we don't see the actual sensor, but the sensor's fed information into the computer for the computer to do an algorithm to give us a value. Does that make sense? So we're going to look at the live data, and it sees the steering angle sensor is conducted and no evidence of dropout. So he's looking at the angle, as he's turning the steering wheel, nothing's dropping out. He conducted, what have we got here? So it's upright. So he went on then and did a voltage drop test, which is a wise thing. Some of you who started with me would know what I'm talking about when I talk about voltage drop, okay, testing. When we do electrical, we're going to go into things very much with things like voltage drops, okay, and testing powers and whatnot, and looking for both ground voltage drop and power voltage drop. So he's done all that and found them to be all okay. So there's no problems there. So then what did he do? He started to do a current draw. All right? It's got a very old looking amp clamp, but he's using an amp clamp to see what the draw of the amps are on different things. And he's done an amp check. He's checked the fuse. There's an 80 fuse amp fuse, right? So now he's using that fuse to do his amp test in that area there. He's probably put a loop around it and he's clamped it to check the amps when he's working the power steering. He found 79 amps under light steering. 79 amps on an 80 amp circuit is a heck of a lot of amps to be drawing, okay? So he found that, and so that was found to be 79 amps under light steering load, indicating excessive current draw by the power steering pump. All right. So what did he do with that information? He's made a fault description conclusion that the excessive current draw by the power steering pump. So the pump was replaced. He's replaced the pump with a reconditioned unit, and the post-fitment current draw of no load was 11.7. If we look at the previous one, which I didn't read out before, where are we? Come down. Here we go. He checked it before, it was 8.9 amps, so it's actually higher than it was before. If you think about it, if the car's not driving, or if it's going very slow, are we going to have more assistance in the power steering or less?
More.
More, aren't we?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that that's probably normal. It's gone up a little bit, maybe. I don't know. But then we have a look.
11.7.
So it went down to 25 amps before when it was up at 89 amps. So 25 amps is a lot different, eh? The only discrepancy I have is that where he tried it on a full lock, where it's going to be even more, because when you're in a full lock, you're actually going to want more assists right on a full lock, so the pump has to work much harder. And I'm assuming that this system is a hydraulic pump with an electric pump, okay? So it's not an electric motor assist, it's a hydraulic assist using an electric pump, okay, instead of a belt-driven pump. He's saying it's gone up to 79 on a full lock. I would be very, very concerned at that. He doesn't seem to think that's a problem, but I think it is, because we're still on an 80 amp circuit. When you think it'd be at least a 100 amp circuit if that was going to go up to be normal at 79 amps. So I'm not convinced that that's 100% fixed, but it certainly has improved because he's now only getting 25 amps on light load, okay? But I'm just going through the process that he went. This is nothing I've done in my shop, but it's what he did in his shop, and he's put it down and shared that with all of us, okay? How he found the problem. So I just thought I'd go through one. There was another one before that that didn't come up for some reason that I couldn't get to work, but it was another case, and I'm pretty sure it was a module problem, and I'll just run through it. He had faults with the power steering where the light came on. When the light came on, he lost assistance, okay? So he put his scan tool on it, and he had no record of a power steering module in the system. He had a fault code for a U code. The U code was obviously a network code similar to this, but did not show up with the power steering, what do you call it, module showing up on the CAN bus network system. He went to the module, after doing some checks, he disconnected the module, then connected it again, and when he connected it, it fired up. So he put his scan tool on. And he went from having a U code to having a code about the steering angle sensor fault. He tested the steering angle sensor, it was perfect. So he ended up determining that the module was playing up. He put a new module in, he put a second-hand module in, sorry. He had to reprogram that module to suit the car, set it all up, his problem was fixed, never had a problem again. And I wanted to highlight that fact that he put a second-hand module. You can get away with putting second-hand modules in some cars, right, particularly older cars, but the newer the car, the less likely you're going to be able to use a second-hand module, because they get programmed with the VIN number, and they all match the VIN numbers throughout the car, and you put a different module in, and it will not operate and be compatible or programmable. If it's a brand new version module, you get to put the VIN number into that module when it's new, and then you put the software on, and it's all okay. But you can't do that with a used module on some new cars. You don't get caught. Plenty of people are getting caught. I had a case, I have shared this story with you some time back. I put a second-hand instrument cluster into a late model Emerock, and it wasn't compatible because it was coded with a VIN number. The EEPROM, which has a read-only program in it, is only programmable once, and it gets programmed with the VIN number in it. I was able to unsolder the EEPROM and swap it over with my original cluster and got that to work that way. But even that's getting harder to do with new cars because their computers are so compact that you can't pull them apart and do things like that. So yeah, the newer the cars, the less likely we can put some second-hand parts in. Even transmissions, to put a whole transmission in, sometimes the module is built into the transmission in the valve body and we can't change it. So I think you got caught with one once, Mohammed, with the transmission playing up that was second-hand.
Oh yeah, in it was the Audi.
Audi, yeah. So what did you have to do in the end?
They had to change the module
Yes?
from this transmission to that, and
Yeah.
they changed
Yeah.
something in the cockpit.
Yeah. But it's not simple, is it?
Yeah, no.
Not simple at all. So with us coming into, you guys particularly coming into where you are in the industry, things have changed from when I was in the industry, and these are the changes that we're seeing. So what I could get away with, you won't be able to get away with. In other words, you'll have to be buying brand new modules. If you're going to be buying a brand new module, and you're going to be spending, $5 or $6 grand on a module, which is unheard of, are you going to be sure you'll diagnose that car properly before you spend $6 or $7 grand on a module or whatever it is? You want to be, won't you? We want to be very sure. So I'm building in your minds, it's no good anymore that we just throw a part of the car because we think something's wrong. We need to diagnose that part properly and know that there's a problem. And we're talking about steering today, so relate this back to steering. If we have a problem with the steering, are we going to put a new steering module in unless we're sure? And we don't put any part in unless we're sure, for that matter. So we need to be sure, don't we? We need to do things. I used to double check and triple check by doing double or triple types of testing. All right, I've done my first test. I put an oscilloscope on the sensor and it's not reading properly. Okay, is that the sensor, or have I still got a voltage drop somewhere that I've missed? So I get my voltmeter out and check. You know, I do different things just to double check, triple check that I haven't missed anything before I go and buy a sensor, because I want to be sure. And when I do it with the customer is I'll say, I found this fault in your system, but I can't go and check your full system until we fix this part up. So once we put this part in, then we can check your full system, just in case there is another problem. We've got to cover ourselves. If I tell the customer, this is the problem with your car, if I put this in and you spend this money, your car's fixed, and then I find there's another problem, am I going to be able to go back to that customer easily and make him put another part in the car? You're going to lose confidence with me?
Yeah.
So we have to be careful how we sell ourselves to the customer, okay? Or how we sell our repairs to the customer is what I mean. All right. Any questions, by the way?
Sir, do you have an experience, for example, do you have an experience telling to one of your customer that I need to fix this part to be able to know if there is something wrong with another part or something like that? How do you deliver it?
As long as I'm confident in the way I present the problem, I don't think I've had a problem, but it's important you communicate correctly. So not only do you do it on the phone and talk to the customer, you do it via email or text message so you have a backup, okay? And you state very clearly that this is part of the diagnostic process to replace this part is part of us being able to properly diagnose your car to find out if we fixed it. Don't even say fix it, to find out if we have, so we can go forward with our diagnostic checks thereafter, okay? So that they are well aware that we're not fixing their car, but we've found a problem with their car and we're only fixing that problem so we can move forward to the next stage. Okay? 99% of the time we have fixed it, but that 1% time we want to be able to cover ourselves. Okay? We do get it wrong sometimes, or there's more than one problem sometimes. Okay? Alright, we'll move on now to repairing, okay? And we're looking at some of the mechanical things now. Who's experienced in repairing some steering problems as far as tie rod ends or ball joints? We're all done, or some of us have done some of that.
You know what we usually do with the ball joint?
Right.
Back at home. We don't just buy new ones.
Right.
We recondition it with hydraulic press.
Right.
So it will be much cheaper.
Okay. Fair enough, but Australia we can buy a part fairly reasonably priced, and the amount of labour it takes for us to do what you're talking, and there are people in Australia that do recondition ball joints, okay, but they'll never last as long as a new one to my knowledge, and they'll never be as good as a new one. So I don't recommend in trying to repair it, but I hear you, and I know it happens here too. But look, if we have to undo a tie rod end or a ball joint, they're a tapered press fitting when you do the nut up. They press up into the tapered hole that they'd go into the stub axle, and they tighten up, and then when we come to get them off, we need a tool to shock them off. I have, and I still do, and I still swear by it, I will use a hammer and bounce the hammer and it will shock off, okay? But there are tools for releasing ball joints and tie rod ends.
Yeah, that's what I do as well.
Yeah. There's also tools for, pardon me. There's also tools for maybe pressing out a ball joint so we don't have to pull the whole stub axle out. Certain ball joints need pressing out. Some of them are riveted, we've got to drill out the rivets, and then we get bolts and we can bolt them in, meaning like maybe 4 rivets holding a ball joint on the upper control arm, and we have to drill them out and then we bolt them up with the lock nuts. So, different ways of holding boots. Who's ever seen a rack and pinion boot with a zip tie on it?
Yeah.
Who's done that?
No.
Good. Who do I kick? I kick Shimon in the backside. You don't do that because it won't seal. You can never get it tight enough, okay? So if you ever see a zip tie, cut it off and put a proper clip on.
Yesterday we changed the CV boot,
Yes,
and the mechanic that I was working with
yes.
just put the plastic one, tie,
Give it a zip
zip
tie.
tie, and I asked him, why don't you use this?
Yes,
Because it comes with a box.
That's right.
Yeah, it comes in a
It
kit, yeah.
comes with a clip, and I asked him, why don't you use this one? It's already in the shop. No, it's much better.
To bring the customer back.
I think it's just that they don't have the special tool.
There's a
I
tool.
think it's a special
it's a very cheap and very easy tool to use, so
It's
there's
much better, that's
there's
what-
no excuse.
It's special.
Personally, I hate doing CVs,
Do you?
but now I like doing it because you have the tool.
The special.
So then you
Yeah.
put it, push it,
Yeah,
wash it.
yeah. You know what the tool is. If I remember to bring one to class, I will tomorrow, but I may forget, but I'll try and remember. But yeah, they're very easy to use, okay? All right.
The mechanic you.
Oh, nearly forgot to tell you. When you're undoing a tie rod end, always count how many turns you undo the old tie rod. So when you put it back on, you put it back the same place. The other thing I do, when it's got like a lock nut on the end, there's a lock nut. On the lock nut on the end there, I often loosen the lock nut and bring it back so it's just touching where the tie rod end is mating up against it, so that when I put the other one in, I've counted it, but I've also made it up with the lock nut, so it's about the same size. We still have to check the toe end when we finish, because there could be a variation. Also, that's what an inner rack or inner tie rod end looks like, if anyone hasn't seen one. So we have the outer tie rod end, and in behind the boot we pull the boot off and we expose that there. And that's got a thread on it. We undo that, and when we undo that, that whole little shaft comes out. Has anyone pulled one of those out?
Yes.
You have? Yeah, pretty basic.
Does it got a, sometimes when you got a play in that, you can put a shim.
When you get play in this, you've got to replace it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's a little ball. It's like
Yeah.
a little ball joint. Okay. I was hoping to bring a rack and pinion tomorrow. Where I used to work, I had one, and I know it was in the back of my old shed. I know it was still there last time I was in the back of the shed. I was going to go and see him to get it, and I went there yesterday, and I don't know, at 4 o'clock he had all his doors closed for some reason, so missed out. All right, so that's a tool for if you don't want to use a hammer to pull a tie rod off. But I've owned those; they're pretty good. Ball joints in the steering linkages and the lower control arm outer ball joint. Before attempting any repairs, a technician repair manual should be consulted for correct procedures and precautions. Removing steering wheel linkages and ball joints, special pliers, he calls it, special pliers are required to pull the tie rod and steering linkage joints apart without damaging. Maybe I wouldn't call that pliers, but that's what it is. We talked about steering adjustments last week. Is everyone happy with steering adjustments and what to do there? We saw that little video last week, and Mohammed, you might have seen it on one video, did you?
Oh, not yet.
No, but anyhow, it's a process that we don't want to over tighten, and we only go a little bit at a time to adjust, okay?
That is only with the steering box, or does it also comes with the smaller cars, you know, with the rack?
The rack has a different, remember we talked about the yoke bush that was going in with a small adjustment on the outside? It's different but similar, but different, okay. Again, I said we talked about steering wheels. Airbags, we have to be careful of airbags going off. Never have the ignition on.
The battery. Remove the battery.
Okay. Can we turn the camera off?
Yeah.
I disagree with disconnecting, no, I'm only kidding. Okay. I disagree with disconnecting batteries on late model cars because of all the pre-learned values and different things that are in all the modules and sensors and whatnot. For example, he talked about steering angle sensors. He talked about disconnecting the battery to reset the steering angle sensor. I've never heard that before, but I'm not disagreeing with him. But, you know, a lot of modern cars have got presets for the windows going up. They've got all sorts of learned values for idles. There's so much that we lose when we disconnect the battery I will disconnect the battery when I have to, but I try not to because of all those reasons. But I make sure the ignition's off, the key's out. I wait a while for everything, for the computers and that to shut down. And once I'm happy, I'll disconnect it. And I've done that every time, and I've never had a problem. But for your assessments, for my correct, I put on my teaching hat now, yes, disconnect the battery. Just be cautious. When you put an airbag down, which way do you put an airbag down on the ground? Do we put it upside down?
No.
We put it the right way up? Why is that?
You're gonna scratch.
The sensor.
Sorry?
Scratch.
No, but yeah, that's not the real reason.
Just like a sensor that is sensitive.
What happens if the airbag went off when you put it down and you had it upside down?
The impact.
Would it take your head off?
Yeah.
The airbag might take your head off too, but it's a bit softer than an airbag coming up at you than the actual metal part.
Yeah.
But can it come off while it's disconnected?
Could.
Oh, good.
If you dropped it and shocked it,
Yeah.
yeah.
When the battery is
I've never
disconnected,
seen one go off.
Once the airbag is out, if you're
Yes.
carrying a boy, if you drop it,
It could go off.
oh,
Yeah,
Pro-
because it's
probably-
sensing the impact.
It probably won't,
yeah.
but I wouldn't be going to try it. I used to go to Japan a lot and buy used parts from Japan in the scrap yards, and I used to watch them deliberately set off these airbags just before they pull the cars apart for their own safety. So they were aware of the accidents that could happen, so they would let them go off. Quite fun to watch them go off. But yeah, you have to be careful how you handle an airbag. You don't want to shock it, you don't want to drop it, you don't want to put it down the wrong way around if it did go off, okay? So just be aware of that. Always mark your steering wheel so you get it back in the right position. And what I said earlier, and I think there's another video, another slide about it, use the right tool to pull the steering wheel off. Don't try and jiggle it off, okay? And don't use a hammer and pull
Center
it off.
punch.
A center punch, light mark just to mark it, but not to shock it. There's the correct way to pull the steering wheel off. Okay? And when we, like all jobs, when we finish our jobs, what are we going to do? Are we just going to drive the car out? We're going to check everything's done properly, aren't we? So when repairing steering, the wheel alignment must be checked before the road test. We're going to run the engine to operating temperature and check the steering from lock to lock. The steering should be the same number of turns to the centre from the left turn. So 1.5, 2.5, whatever. The same when you get the centre the other way. Make sure it's all centred like that. With the steering, we must be smooth on both directions and with no leaks from the power steering, okay? Are we going to hold the steering on a full lock and...
No.
No, why are we going to do that?
Gonna run the
Puts
pump.
more pressure on the
Yes, we
pump.
put a lot of pressure on everything, don't we, including the pump. And check the steering assist to centre, so make sure when we're driving that the stiffness is in the middle of the steering wheel where it should be, not one way or the other. If it was one way or the other way, what would that tell us?
Leak on the.
We have a problem, either we haven't centralised something properly or we haven't calibrated our steering angle sensor properly, okay? And we're going to check the vehicle for being clean, and we're going to make sure there's no leaks, and we'll let the customer know the car's right, okay? And we're going to put all our tools away before we go on to the next job. We always make everything clean. And what we're going to do with the old steering rack that we've just pulled off. Okay, we've changed the steering rack. What are we going to do with the old one?
Raise
We put it
recycle bin.
Yeah.
Bring it home.
What are we not going to do? Bring it home. What are we not going to do? Are we going to put it in the backyard of our workshop?
No.
Is it out in the open? No. Good answer. I've taught you. I've taught
Yes.
you well. Maybe. Do you do it in practice? We'll see.
This one will bring home.
Any questions? Yeah, very quiet class. Who did not learn anything today?
Wait, paano kailan tayo?
Who learned something today?
No one.
No one. Time to go home, I think.